Let me tell you my story.
My skin is always like this.
Let's talk about sex and put an end to fossil fuel exploitation to prevent environmental catastrophe.
Thank you. My first awareness of the power of habitual behavior came 8 years ago when my grandma, Oma, fell down a flight of stairs. Along with a fractured arm, she also suffered a subdural hematoma, a brain bleed. Within months, she had lost a large portion of her mental function, and within a year, she was moved into a supported living facility. A few days before this move took place, my father and uncle were busily boxing up all of Oma's belongings when the clock struck 2. My dad noticed and jokingly said, "Oma, it's 2 o'clock on Thursday. It's time to irrigate." Much to the surprise of everyone in the room, Oma, without missing a beat, got up from her bed, walked out the front door, crossed her lawn, pulled up her irrigation gate, and proceeded to follow the water as it crisscrossed her lawn, carrying water to her plants. Oma, who could no longer recognize faces or recite her own street address, still remembered that 2 o'clock on Thursday meant irrigation, and further still, how to irrigate. When I first heard this story, my immediate question was, how is that even possible? It was possible because every week, twice a week, for the last 64 years, Oma had been enacting the same behavioral pattern. It was possible because of habit. So this presentation will trace the science and psychology of habits, our unconscious and ingrained actions, and the potential of using our awareness to empower thoughtful change to them. I will combine my lived experiences of changing my own habits with my academic research to show how individuals and communities may enact transformations to align our most everyday of actions with our deepest of values. So, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a habit is a usual way of behaving, something that a person does often in a regular or repeated way. Habits, as I have come to know them, are the ingrained patterns of behavior that lead us through our everyday lives. When we start looking, we can see them in everything. In the way we move, communicate, the way we engage with our work and get from place to place, in what we choose to eat and when, even in the way we vote. Who brushed their teeth this morning? Had coffee? Who meditated? Checked their email? Who's avoiding their email? The famous philosopher and psychologist William James once said, "All our life, so far as it has definite form, is but a mass of habits." And according to a study conducted by researchers at Duke University, over 40% of our daily actions are not the product of conscious consideration, but of habit. If this is true, where is our own power to change ourselves, our communities, and the world we live in? This is the question that I set out to explore with my Greenstone. As I reflected on my own relationship with habit, I was faced with the unconsciousness that exists in so many of my daily actions. I realized how much time I spent on autopilot. Now, there is a good reason for autopilot and for habit. They make our lives easier by allowing us to do many things without having to think too hard. However, a pilot would never put a plane on autopilot without first charting her course or knowing her destination. And this is the metaphor that I would like to draw between our habits and our values. The Oxford Dictionary defines our values as our standards of behavior or a person's principles, one's judgment of what is important in life. So one would expect that our behavioral patterns would reflect our values, and they often do to some extent, and yet often less than they could. Take, for example, the value of environmentalism, a value system that centers around the preservation of life on Earth. We know that certain behaviors will have a detrimental impact on our environment, and yet how often do we forget to bring our own grocery bags or to ask for a drink without a straw? I have learned that we possess more control over this relationship than we know. So habits have been categorized in different ways. Aruna Balanchandra defines 3 types of habits: motor habits, intellectual habits, and habits of character. Motor habits encompass physical activities or things that require muscle power. Intellectual habits are habits related to our psychological processes, behaviors of intellect. Habits of character relate to the way that we engage with the people around us and the world. And now, as we all know, categories can be problematic. And although I think that these categories are very helpful in understanding how habits influence our daily actions, I want to acknowledge the broader scale of collective, or what could be called cultural habits. And by cultural, I mean shared value systems. For instance, in this community, there is a shared culture of environmentalism. This gives us a better idea of the way in which habits support our daily lives. But how do these habits work? When describing the neurology of habit, Charles Duhigg, author of The Power of Habit, writes about a research study conducted by MIT back in the 1990s, in which they tested a rat's ability to internalize new patterns of behavior. These researchers discovered the habit loop, a cycle with 3 components that encourage the creation and maintenance of habits. These components are the cue, the routine, and the reward. The cue acts as our reminder. It inspires us to enact our routines. The routine is the habit itself, whether that be washing your hands, holding the door for someone, smiling at a stranger. The reward is probably the most important part of the habit loop. It reinforces the habit loop by cultivating gratitude, predictability, and a sense of comfort. Take, for example, finishing a homework assignment. The cue could be seeing our math book perched on the end of our bed, but it could also be remembering how good it feels to receive praise for work well done. The cue reminds us of the routine, and the reward acts as an incentive, encouraging us to carry out the behavior. So these researchers also discovered something called chunking. Chunking is what our brains do to adapt and integrate a new habit. This neurological process is responsible for making repeated behaviors easier to carry out. In their experiment, a rat was placed behind a partition within a T-shaped maze, much like this one. At the end of one vertical section of the T, researchers had hidden a small piece of chocolate, the reward. When the partition slid back, it made a loud clicking sound, the cue. The rat would hear their cue, smell the reward, and begin the search for the chocolate. The routine was simple, scurrying down the horizontal portion of the T, checking both sides of the vertical, and finding the chocolate. At first, the rat's search was quite slow. However, as the routine became more familiar, with each repetition, the rat learned to eliminate unnecessary activity, and over time, the rat's walk through the maze became a sprint, and the route to the reward went on autopilot. Surprisingly, as the rat repeated the behavior, researchers saw the animal's neurological activity reduced from constant, vibrant explosions to just 2 spikes. 1 spike at the reminder, and 1 spike at the reward. 1 spike at the reminder, and 1 spike at the reward. Our brains want to refine and expedite behavioral patterns by neurologically linking the reminder, the action, and the reward, thereby reducing the amount of mental energy that goes into behaviors that we repeat regularly. A common phrase used in the fields of biology, neurology, and psychology goes, neurons that fire together, wire together. Of course, neuron A has to be directly associated with the firing of neuron B, but for the most part, this is an accurate depiction of what repeated behavior does to the human brain. Essentially, the synapse, or the small space between neurons which allows one neuron to pass an electrical or chemical signal to another, is the way in which neurons communicate. And in the words of D.N. Ware, when brain cells communicate frequently, the connection between them strengthens. Messages that travel the same pathway in the brain over and over begin to transmit faster and faster, and with enough repetition, they can become automatic. Think about the new habits that you've developed since coming to green school, like carrying a glass or bamboo straw with you wherever you go, checking labels for palm oil ingredients, and checking that packaging is recyclable before adding a product to your cart. These activities rely on the brain's ability to adapt to new routines and over time make them easier to carry out. In other words, our brain's ability to create an autopilot program or a habit. So as I'm sure you can probably tell by now, our brain is all about efficiency. This is shown yet again in a process known as synaptic pruning. Synaptic pruning is the way in which the brain streamlines mental function by getting rid of old, unused pathways and strengthening the ones that are frequently used. This is me at just 2 years old, a time in my life where at times I was creating as many as 40,000 new synapses per second. This is me at age 10. Nearly 50% of the synapses my brain had developed in the first photo have been pruned. So what does this mean for us? Do we become stuck in our ways? Is trying to change a habit a hopeless endeavor? Are we destined for a life lived on autopilot? We've all heard the phrase, "you can't teach an old dog new tricks," a popular idiom that basically suggests people can't change once a certain type of behavior is established. My research has shown me that this statement is false. In the words of E. Paul Zur, a professor of kinesiology and neuroscience at University of Victoria, BC, Canada, neuroplasticity are weights in our brain at any age. New pathways can be created at any time throughout a person's life, just as old ones can get pruned as they fall out of use. So what is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity refers to the potential that the brain has to reorganize by creating new neural pathways to adapt as it needs. Neuroplasticity represents our aptitude for change, our ability to alter our behavior, adapt to changing circumstances, and grow as individuals. And so after realizing that I wasn't stuck in my ways, I decided to give changing a try. Two of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now are sustainability of the planet and sustainability of the self. On both levels, there is the potential for burnout. This past year, I had a slew of tropical diseases, such as dengue, typhoid, amoebic dysentery. I also attended the COP21. An amoebic dysentery. I realized that in order to get better, I needed to establish new, healthier routines, new habits. I also attended the COP21 in Paris, the UN Climate Summit, where I saw firsthand the critical need for adapting and adopting new behaviors if we want to sustain our planet. So making my way of living more sustainable on both a personal and environmental level became of the utmost priority to me. I wanted to reconfigure the way I lived my life, and I wanted to do it yesterday. I wanted to go to sleep earlier, become more proactive, run marathons, and eat nothing but organic goji berries and kale until the day I died. I wanted to get rid of all of my bad habits, replace them with better ones, and add a few extra just for good measure. So I decided to test my own ability to make new routines habitual. I spent 3 weeks waking up early enough to list 10 gratitudes, stumbling out of bed into a series of contortionist postures, or yoga, forcing my warm and slightly less groggy body into a freezing cold shower, eating a sad breakfast free of processed sugar, and then drowning myself in glass after glass of water. I built gratitude, yoga, cold showers, hydration, and a processed sugar-free diet and daily reading into my life for a first-person experience of the process behind habit change. It definitely wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, but it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be either. By using the psychology of habit as my guide, I was, for the most part, successful in establishing new patterns of behavior that worked in my favor. This was me reprogramming my own autopilot, and it did, in the beginning, take more energy, but like with the rat that we saw earlier, over time, these efforts became easier and easier. By choosing my cues, altering my routines, and discovering the associated rewards, I used the psychology of habit as my guide to make personal change. But habits don't exist on a personal level. Habits don't exist on a personal level alone. Habitual activities can be seen in the behavior of entire communities and across whole countries. A great example of a habit shared by a huge number of people is tea drinking in Great Britain. In Great Britain, television soap operas have a cult-like following. EastEnders has been running since 1985 and still has around 10 million people tuning in to each new episode. When the 40-minute program comes to an end, 1.75 million households turn on their electric kettles and begin brewing water for tea. This creates a huge surge in power usage across the island. Collectively, these kettles require 3 gigawatts of power. All across the UK, backup stations go on standby, and power is even made available in France in case the UK's grid can't cope. So I've asked you already, but I'm going to ask you again. Who brushed their teeth this morning? All right, way to go. Okay, so in the 1930s, a man named Claude Hopkins was tasked with the responsibility of marketing Pepsodent to the American people. While reading up on dental hygiene, he discovered the film. So run your tongue across your teeth right now. If you can't feel it, congratulations, you brushed your teeth this morning. If you can, we all know why. The film was the key to Pepsodent's success because it became the cue. With slogans like, "Get rid of that dangerous film that coats your teeth," people adapted very, very quickly, and within a decade, the Pepsodent habit had spread to 65% of the US population. And as you probably know, Pepsodent is now for sale all over the world. I have shown that habits can be changed, created and ingrained on an individual and collective scale. So what does this mean for me as a person, for us as a community, and for the world we live in? Where is our power in this? We can use this knowledge to empower communities and ourselves to bring their habits towards congruence with our values. We can topple constructs like, "We've always done it this way." We can combat global warming, conflict, disease, and this, as with so many things, starts on an individual level. If we think about the 3 or 4 types of habits, intellectual, character, motor, and then the habits that exist within the collective, within our culture, I am sure everyone in this room can think of habits that they would like to realign with their values, get rid of, or gain, and we have the power to do so. The habits that we are enacting right now, today, will continue to support or inhibit us until the day we die or the day we decide to change. So I invite all of us to choose something small, medium, or massive and make a habitual shift that aligns our actions with our values, to realize the power of habit in the best way possible. Thank you.